Folks, Friday's March jobs report came in, get this, at 98,000. Just half of the expected 180,000. But hey, you and I did not expect 180,000, right? If you watch this show on a regular basis, then you already knew that this was coming. And folks, forget about following the ADP report. For trading purposes, the ADP report has proven time and time again that it's not a good leading indicator for the monthly jobs report. Worse, guys, both prior months were revised lower as well. And if there was any doubt that the unemployment rate is faked, and I mean, guys, I mean, the unemployment rate is worthless for stock traders, okay? The unemployment rate fell from 4.7% to 4.5%, even though the rate of job growth has slowed. Okay, so the rate of job growth has slowed, but the rate of drop in the unemployment rate has not. What? Come on. Federal Reserve Bank of Richmond President Jeffrey Lacker quit this last week as he was caught leaking private Federal Reserve information in October of 2012 to Medley Global Advisors, who then leaked that information to its high net worth clients. In October 2nd, 2012, Richmond Fed President Jeffrey Lacker speaks by phone with a Medley Global Advisor analyst and passed on the information that the Fed was likely to vote as early as its December meeting to begin monthly purchases of $45 billion of treasuries. He also leaked other details of the Fed's internal deliberations that took place also on that day. On October 3rd, 2012, Medley then sent a note to clients saying that the Fed is, quote, likely to vote as early as its December meeting, unquote, to begin monthly purchases of $45 billion of treasuries, along with other details of the Fed's internal deliberations. Medley's clients then did a massive front run of the U.S. Treasury markets. And basically the game is to front run the treasuries that the Fed was going to buy. On October 4th, 2012, then Fed Chairman Ben Bernanke informs the Federal Open Market Committee that he has asked Fed staffers to look into the leak and the insider trading. When December 2012 came, the Fed announced it will buy $45 billion of Treasury securities a month, and Medley clients that front-run the insider information made a killing. So, I mean, folks, right? I mean, come on. But now this is the other thing. If Ben Bernanke knew about the leaked information a day after it was leaked to Medley, right? Okay. Then why did Ben Bernanke still announce the buying of treasuries in December? Right? He could have postponed the treasury buying because of the leak, but he didn't. The reason he didn't is because he didn't care that Medley had front-run the leaked information. That tells me that Ben Bernanke and the Fed is involved in leaking information to high net worth clients on a regular basis. And the only difference this time was that they got caught. Lacker got caught. What made this leak different is that they actually got caught. CNBC reported on the Jeff Lacker resignation.
Just got on the phone with Richard Cullen, who is Jeffrey Lacker's attorney. Jeffrey Lacker, as we've reported in the last hour, abruptly resigned today for his involvement in the 2012 Medley confidential information case that's been out there and investigated. The attorney telling me that no charges will be brought against Jeff Lacker, that he's been informed by the United States Attorney for the Southern District that this ends the affair for Jeff Lacker.
No charges are going to be brought against Lacker. Are you kidding me? Seriously, folks? Once again, it's one set of laws for the bankers and one set of laws for the peasant amateur traders like you and me. We would have been fined and sent to jail, but the banker Lacker gets to retire and go free. You know, he probably had some kind of sweet retirement golden parachute too, you know. Lacker should be punished worse than an amateur trader because he knows better. He abused his role at the Federal Reserve and took advantage of the public's interest. Lacker doesn't go to jail because the very government agency that makes the laws, Congress, they engage in insider trading too. Folks, Congress has engaged in insider trading for decades and decades. 60 Minutes exposed the insider trading done by Congress back in 2011, but no one went to jail and no one was fined. Remember this incredible exchange between 60 Minutes and Nancy Pelosi?
Madam Leader, I wanted to ask you why you and your husband back in March of 2008 accepted and participated in a very large IPO deal from Visa. At a time there was major legislation affecting the credit card companies making its way through the House. And did you consider that to be a conflict of interest?
I don't know what your point is of your question. Is there some point that you want to make with that?
Well, I guess what I'm asking is, do you think it's all right for a speaker to accept a very preferential, favorable stock deal?
Well, we didn't.
And you participated in the IPO.
Well, I have many
and at the time you were
investments, but
Speaker of the House. You don't think it was a conflict of interest or had the appearance of a conflict of interest?
It only has the appearance if you decide that you're going to have elaborate on a false premise. But it
There you have it, folks. Nancy Pelosi dodges the question and says, "What's the point you're trying to make?" Then Nancy Pelosi basically said, "It's only going to look bad to the public if you mention it to the public." Back in 2011, Who News Radio 104 had Ron Paul on, and this dude calls in, and I thought Ron Paul gave kind of a weak answer. You know, he must have been having an off day, but this caller, you know, called in and he just nailed the insider trading, you know, because he watched 60 Minutes and he wanted to know what Ron Paul thought. Check out what Ron Paul had to say about insider trading in Congress.
If it's against the crime to commit theft and fraud and shooting people, the congressmen aren't exempt from it. So if there's an SEC law and rule that says you can't do such a thing, there's nothing written that says, oh yes, this law is written to punish you, a private citizen, but the congressmen are exempt. I'm quite confident that doesn't exist. Because of the corruption in the system, maybe they get around it, just like rich people get around the judicial system all the time. Rich people, you know, never go to jail for long periods of times, or rich people don't ever get electrocuted. It's poor people that do. So it's the system.
So Ron Paul just said that the SEC has the legal obligation to go after Congress members who are engaged in insider trading, and yet the SEC under the Obama administration refused to do that. Alex Jones of Infowars.com had this to say about Congress and insider trading.
But it's all this insider trading, hardcore insider trading by the leadership of the House and Senate, both parties. Nancy Pelosi increasing her net wealth in 2 years by 69%, while the rest of the country's net wealth went down. Let me explain. They passed laws to buy weapon systems with your tax money that they're invested in. They pass laws that benefit their very investments. And that's just dealing with the stocks they own. Then you got stuff like Michael Chertoff, the head of Homeland Security. In the last year he's there, in 2008 into 2009, he makes a multi-billion-dollar recommendation for purchases through Congress for naked body scanners at airports. And then, of course, the week before they're about to be deployed in airports, the underwear bomber is gotten on the plane by the U.S. government. That's Detroit Free Press, C-SPAN. Undersecretary of State Kennedy admits that happened. Sad issue, though. I digress. That was a good little promo for them, though, right as they went in with all their unpopularity. And he is now the main consultant for that company and has made millions of dollars off of it. They've made billions. There's an example of insider trading. You've got this sick relationship between the corrupt government people and the big mega Fortune 100. And they're allowed to insider trade. They're allowed to steal bank accounts. They're allowed to steal pensions and sell derivative crap and then get, $20+ trillion bailouts of your tax money while lecturing you all day about welfare and about how they got to raise taxes and cut benefits for austerity to pay the derivatives off they created.
That's why banker Lacker gets to go free, while if you or I engaged in insider trading, we'd be burned at the stake. The rich and powerful have one set of laws that apply to them, while amateur traders like you and me have a different set of laws that apply to us. Notice that the rich and powerful get to become even more rich and powerful, while amateur traders, we have laws stacked against us that prevents us from becoming rich. And you wonder why the gap keeps growing between the rich and powerful and everyone else. Folks, we live in truly corrupt times when a banker like Lacker gets to retire and go free for insider trading. Folks, if you really want to take your trading to the next level, you need to check out Jeff Bishop's trading services like Jason Bond Picks and Biotech Breakouts. These are very popular services with people who are looking to quit their day jobs to become proficient full-time traders. Not only do you get top-notch training of how to screen thousands of stocks for the precise patterns that have win ratios of 75, even 80%, you also get instant text alerts and email alerts when a new trade is entered. Jason Bond made over 300% in 2016. Jason Bond Pick signups through GorillaStockTrading.com help keep independent shows like this online. Just click on any of the ads on GorillaStockTrading.com to sign up for Jason Bond Picks, and thank you for your support. The UN has been bringing in illegal immigrants for years and cheating taxpayers by giving them Social Security cards and qualifying them for long-term disability. This is why the UN and globalists can't be trusted. This is why Trump won the White House on a globalist backlash. This is why the America First movement has taken over this country at all levels of government. Americans are sick and tired of these globalist schemes being ran against us. The UN and the shadow government inside the U.S. have helped to destroy our Social Security program. Social Security is a scam. They take our money by threat of force and funnel it into wicked globalist schemes while telling us it's for our own retirement and it's for our own good. In reality, the globalist UN is taking our Social Security money. Josh Tolley had a whistleblower on his show that revealed this vile and wicked scheme. Jill Noble, who began attending UN Refugee Resettlement Program meetings sponsored by the Missouri Social Services, said that state officials and those involved with processing the new arrivals are trying to classify as many as possible as being permanently disabled by claiming they have chronic backaches and lower back pain, allowing them to collect taxpayer money for the rest of their lives despite never having contributed to the Social Security system. Is Jill Noble crazy? Here's a brief segment of the Josh Tolley Show.
The first things we were supposed to do was sign them up for Social Security. Yeah.
Wait, this is unbelievable. So they come over here and they get a Social Security number.
Right.
They become legal.
Correct.
Are you pulling my leg?
No, I'm not. And then after we processed them for a Social Security card, then we were to process them for a U.S. passport.
No, you're not.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So that's about the time I kind of decided, okay, I was done. I've heard everything I want to know. I was so angry about this, that they would receive a U.S. passport. It just, I just couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe that we were giving these people Social Security cards and U.S. passports and free medical, free housing, free food, free everything.
Yeah, but the thing that bothers me, because the food we can recoup from, And the money irritates me, but we can earn it back and we can stop the program or whatever it is. But once you give somebody a Social Security number and you give them what's considered globally the golden ticket, which is a U.S. passport,
Right.
that is beyond comprehension that
Right.
we're doing this.
That's right.
Do bureaucrats know this is happening?
Well, interestingly enough, no, they don't. A lot of governors are unaware of how many refugees have come into their state, where they're located, under what conditions they've arrived. And I believe this is intentional. Now, we do know that the governor of Texas and the governor of Tennessee have both stopped this, and they're refusing to take any more refugees. In fact, the federal government has filed a lawsuit against both of those states because they're refusing to take any more refugees.
How dare you keep your people safe?
Right.
Folks, you need to head over to the Josh Tolley channel on YouTube and watch the entire interview. If Jill Noble isn't crazy, folks, we now have a direct link to how globalism has destroyed the U.S. Social Security system. And what a bunch of liars. They claim that Social Security is going broke because there's too many baby boomers retiring, so that the ratio of workers to retirees is too low, right? You've probably heard that. Oh, yeah, there used to be 3 workers for every 1 retiree. Now there's 1 worker for every 3 retirees. Suckers. We all fell for that one. Social Security isn't failing because of retirees. It's failing because of the UN and the globalists putting millions of illegal aliens on Social Security in the backs of taxpayers. Meanwhile, better raise the Social Security tax for all Americans who are working. That's sick, folks. But it gets even worse. In a lawsuit filed by the Thomas More Law Center on behalf of the Tennessee General Assembly, the federal government is violating the Constitution's spending clause and the 10th Amendment by force-feeding refugees into the state using taxpayer-funded ministries and nonprofit organizations to funnel even more refugees in at public expense, despite the state dropping out of the program in 2008. And do you think President Trump can fix this? I'm not so sure, folks. President Trump tried to slow down the massive refugee influx, but U.S. Judge Derek Watson in Hawaii overturned President Trump in the federal courts and reopened the floodgates. And so the State Department continues to ship in UN-designated refugees at breakneck speed. Nothing in the U.S. Constitution permits or authorizes the importation of people from around the world at U.S. taxpayer expense. Some of you might be thinking, well, Lance, isn't the UN just trying to help these refugee people out? Peter Sutherland, the United Nations Special Representative of the Secretary General for International Migration, said in an October 8th interview with UN News Center, when asked, "What is your message to governments?" he said, quote, "I will ask the governments to cooperate, to recognize that sovereignty is an illusion. That sovereignty is an absolute illusion that has to be put behind us. The days of hiding behind borders and fences are long gone. We have to work together and cooperate together to make a better world. And that means taking on some of the old shibboleths, taking on some of the old historic memories and images of our own country and recognizing that we're all just a part of humankind." Folks, that statement should send chills down your spine, right? Right? Think about that. Sutherland is advocating a one world government. Sutherland just said that U.S. sovereignty is an illusion. The UN wants to destroy U.S. nationalism and U.S. sovereignty. Sutherland's statement sounds like something a socialist or communist would say. Oh, wait, Sutherland is a socialist. In fact, Socialist International has been exerting enormous political influence worldwide since the 1950s, especially through its dominant influence at the United Nations. The Socialist International membership includes more than 160 socialist parties from more than 100 countries, At its 1962 Congress in Oslo, Norway, Socialist International said, quote, "The ultimate objective of the parties of the Socialist International is nothing less than world government," unquote. There you have it. The UN High Commissioner for Refugees, Antonio Guterres, is the former Socialist Party Prime Minister of Portugal and former President of the European Council. Socialist International is a radical Marxist group that includes many former communist parties that have rebranded themselves as socialist or social democrat. Is it really that surprising that the UN, ruled by a bunch of socialist Marxists, would take money away from taxpayers and the U.S. social security system and give it to refugees? After all, their saying is, from each according to his ability, to each according to his need. That's one of those things that socialists say that sounds good, but when you really think about the meaning of that, from each according to his ability, to each according to his need, you realize just how sick that statement is. Folks, the entire globalist agenda is being exposed around the world, and the UK through Brexit and the US through President Trump are leading the freedom movement towards nationalism and sovereignty. None of this increasing social unrest should be good for the U.S. stock market, and yet the market continues to go higher and higher while the U.S. economy slows. The auto sales forecast was for 17.3 million in March. The actual number came in at 16.53. The mainstream media is calling this a negative surprise, but it was no surprise to us. With auto loan originations falling off of a cliff because of rising interest rates, it was obvious that auto sales were going to come in below analysts' expectations. We called that one right, folks, and so we know our prediction of the subprime auto loan crash coming soon is still intact. The Wall Street Journal Daily Shot published this chart from John Burns Real Estate Consulting. Note how subprime car loans have exceeded the 2007-2008 high. Auto sales were manipulated by qualifying pretty much anybody for a car loan. Worse, auto sales growth was fueled by a form of financial trickery, extending the duration of auto loans. In other words, financial engineering is largely what made auto sales rise, not a strengthening U.S. consumer, as the Federal Reserve and Democrats have said. It's looking more and more like the Fed is hiking rates because of the pension crisis, as pensions hold a large stake in bonds. The Fed is not hiking because of a strong consumer and consumption. It's all about information wars. If the Fed can set the public perception that the U.S. consumer is strong, as evidenced by data like auto sales, then the Fed can get away with rate hikes and not crash the U.S. economy. John Burns Real Estate is awesome, guys. Check out this chart they published back in February. I get asked a lot about why just a quarter-point rate hike is tanking the economy. And my answer is always the same. The market is highly leveraged right now to rate hikes via debt. So many traders are way out on debt margin right now. So many corporations are way in debt because they borrowed money at low interest rates to even buy back their own shares. John Burns Real Estate Consulting quantified some of this debt via sectors. Folks, look at that. The technology sector corporate debt has grown by 332% since 2009. Healthcare sector corporate debt is up 308%. All this debt has interest payments associated with it. And when interest rates are hiked by the Fed, even just a quarter point, it makes a big difference because so many corporations are in so much debt. What corporations should be doing is rapidly deleveraging and paying that debt down as fast as they can, not buying assets at bankruptcy auctions, like how Stage Stores has acquired certain assets of Gordman Stores through a bankruptcy auction. A government shutdown is coming straight at us and fast. The continuing resolution that is currently funding the government expires on April 28th, and if a new funding agreement is not reached before April 28th, there will be a government shutdown like we witnessed in 2013, starting on April 29th. Mike Allen from AxiOS.com reports that a top Republican with close ties to the White House told him that a government shutdown is, get this, quote, more likely than not. Wall Street is not expecting a shutdown, and the markets are unprepared, unquote. The House Freedom Caucus, which Trump blamed on Twitter for killing his Obamacare replacement bill, has already said that defunding Planned Parenthood, the country's biggest abortion provider, is a non-negotiable condition for it to support the government funding bill. Democrats have threatened a government shutdown if Planned Parenthood is not funded and if any money is put towards building a border wall along the Mexico border. Planned Parenthood kills millions of American babies, and they auction off the body parts to the highest bidders, and the federal government gives them approximately $500 million a year to keep operating. That's a big problem, folks, because there's no way a bill that defunds Planned Parenthood gets 60 votes in the Senate. But it's worse than that, folks. Democrats made even more demands beyond a border wall and Planned Parenthood. Mark Levin talked about this on his radio news show a couple of weeks ago.
Now, they're prepared to shut down the government because they want more and more illegal aliens coming across the border. And what you think about that? No, illegal aliens are not vetted by their very definition. So they don't know if they're mass murdering killers, perverts, rapists, terrorists. They have no idea. Drug lords. So they are prepared to shut down the government to make America more dangerous. The Democrat Party is nuts. Absolutely friggin' nuts. Adding more immigration agents to Homeland Security's deportation agency, making Planned Parenthood ineligible for federal cash, and changing former President Barack Obama's policies on the environment, labor, veterans, or consumer protections would also invite a shutdown, Senate Democrats said in a letter to Republican leaders. Yes, you cannot have an election where the Democrats lose, ladies and gentlemen. And once their policies are in place, you cannot have a president who reverses them. That's simply unacceptable.
Folks, globalist Democrats look to be planned to shut down the democratically elected government in this country. Mexico has completely taken over the Democrat Party, and Mexico is engaging in economic warfare against us if we build a border wall. So let's role play this out. If President Trump and Paul Ryan fight the Freedom Caucus over defunding Planned Parenthood, any agreement to fund the government will not have enough Republican votes in the House. But any bill which defunds Planned Parenthood will get filibustered by Democrats in the Senate. President Trump can't make a deal with Democrats either, because then he would have to get that deal passed by a Republican-controlled House and a Republican-controlled Senate, and that's not going to happen. There seems to be no clear course of action, with only a few weeks to go, of exactly how a new funding agreement is going to be reached. This will have an increasingly negative effect on the stock market the closer we get to April 28th. And you know what really ticks me off about the border wall? I hear this lame argument that so many farmers will go out of business because they employ illegal aliens to harvest their grapes and fields. All this apricots and peaches are going to rot on the ground in fields. Folks, Australia has no country to the south along its border. And so how have Australian farmers gotten along for hundreds of years? The industry in Australia has evolved farm automation technology. Australia has farm automation technology for virtually every type of crop you can imagine. They had to develop this technology to eliminate human labor and keep their farm exports cheap on the global market. Look at Japan. They are an island surrounded by water. They have no cheap labor from another country along their border, and yet they get by just fine. They are even landlocked and have very limited space. And look at the technology that they are using.
Farmers used to soil-based farming, being able to plant seedlings while standing was unimaginable. 円形の内側に植えたものが全体的に回転をさせると植えたものが縦軸に外に出てくるという仕組みなんですね。ですから中にずっと毎日植えるとその放っておけば30日もすればですね全部その植えたものが外の方の列に全部出てくるという仕組みです。植えただけであと収穫で済むという極めて簡単な仕組みにしてるんですね。With this circular growing system, the only human labor required is for the planting and harvesting. Almost no work is necessary during the 30 days in which the vegetables grow. The blue tabs at the edge of the circle are what drive the rotational motion. The cultivation circle consists of 250 thin triangular plates, which are each 10 meters long and arranged in a radial formation. As the plates are pushed sideways, the rows of vegetables are automatically guided outwards by rails underneath. The circle rotates for about an hour every day. Seeds are first left to germinate for 2 days in sterilized rooms in a separate building. They are then moved to the dome. After growing for about 2 weeks, the seedlings are then planted in the cultivation circle. Each seedling is placed in a plastic planter in which it continues to grow all the way until harvest. To get to the center of the circle, the worker walks across a bridge. All she has to do once she gets there is place the seedlings in the grooves. It's a very simple operation which requires no prior farming experience.
As for grape harvesting, which is a really big farm in the San Joaquin Valley here where I live, there's grape harvesters like this one sold through VineTech equipment. There's generous financing on these machines, and they will come out and repair the machines too. Cheap illegal alien labor has prevented the adoption of farm automation technologies in the U.S. and put our automation robot technology for farming far behind most other countries. Why develop farm automation technology when you can pay an illegal alien to do it for so cheap? So hiring illegal aliens to pick and harvest crops is actually hurting the farming technology revolution in the U.S. And the second more serious point is, what are you talking about when you say a farmer told you he can't get by without employing illegal aliens? That's money going to somebody who shouldn't be in this country and who you are illegally paying under the table, and neither you nor the illegal alien is paying taxes. If a farming business can't get by without illegally paying an illegal alien under the table, then it shouldn't be in business in the first place. Hiring cheap illegal aliens and paying them under the table has created an oversupply of small farms. Instead of the law of supply and demand setting the equilibrium number of farms and production, there is overproduction caused by the hiring of illegal labor. Worse, many of these illegal aliens were given a Social Security card with a claim that they are disabled, and so they collect Social Security benefits, and they are secretly working for farmers who are illegally paying them under the table, and so they aren't paying taxes on that income. Sure, they pay sales tax, when they buy something, but that's only a fraction of the taxes that they should be paying. So don't try and hide your anti-Trump rhetoric behind the idea that we need illegal labor in this country when countries around the planet who don't have a country like Mexico right next door to them have gotten a long fine for thousands of years. Will some farms go out of business when illegal labor is cut off? Sure. But the oversupply of farms going out of business is actually a good thing long-term for the U.S. Only the farms who have improved their technology with automated machines will survive. And what's wrong with that? The U.S. taxpayer has given subsidies to farmers for way too long. Let the inefficient, old-school small farms that employ illegal labor from Mexico go out of business or automate. I don't know about you, but in the sector in which I work, we don't get government subsidies. We have to automate and improve our technology every week. We had to go from many accountants using ledger paper to a few bookkeepers using computers. We had to go from DOS-based accounting software called DBase and RBase to Windows-based accounting software like Peachtree and using financial spreadsheets created in Excel. We had to go from mailing letters using stamps to using computers to send emails. We had to go from carbon paper copies and fax machines to high-speed copiers that scan to email. We had to go from newspaper advertising to internet advertising over Craigslist and other sites. We had to go from a Yellow Pages ad to have a multifunctional interactive website. The entire business community is in a constant state of adaptation and technology improvements, and yet farmers get taxpayers' subsidies and they get illegal alien labor, and they don't have to adopt new technologies like the rest of us? Really? I don't think so. Don't try that argument with me. That argument doesn't fly here, okay? You need to get your head on straight if you think the U.S. needs illegal alien labor for its farms or any other job in this country. We don't need to exploit people coming into this country illegally and illegally pay them under the table in order to make this country work. We don't have to put our own safety and security at risk so a farmer who has failed to modernize can sit on his ass and get government subsidies and hire illegal alien labor from Mexico. You're just plain stupid if your argument to not build a border wall is that business owners in this country need illegal alien labor. You're just a bona fide numbskull. Now, I know if you watch this show on a regular basis, you're smart enough to not think like that. But come on, folks. There's a lot of numbskulls out there. All right. Sorry, God. Sorry, folks. That's not very Christian of me to call people names. Sorry, folks. Sorry, God. All right. I need to calm down here before I totally backslide and start cussing. All right. Folks, the Gorilla Stock Trading Store has crazy specials on the best trading DVD courses on the market. Many of these popular DVD courses are even half off. We have the popular option trading DVD course on how to trade options at a serious discount, folks. We have the crazy popular Making Money Trading Stocks and Options with over 30 hours of video. We've got the entire Value Investing University 10 DVD collection that includes topics like how to navigate and use Edgar, how to value a company, understanding the balance sheet, understanding the income statement, understanding the cash flow statement, and more. Folks, if you want to take your trading up a notch, or maybe you are looking for a gift for one of your trading buddies, go to GorillaStockTradingStore.com. That's GorillaStockTradingStore.com. All sales made through GorillaStockTradingStore.com go towards keeping GorillaStockTrading.com and this weekly Saturday night show going. And thank you for your support. The EU globalists are trying to make it as hard as possible for the UK to leave the EU. In order for the UK to leave the EU is demanding that the UK keep its borders open to free movement and migration from the bloc for another 2 years. The globalists are pushing that the UK and London be blocked from doing any Euro-related business. British sovereignty over Gibraltar was confirmed in the Treaty of Seville, the Treaty of Paris. Gibraltar is a British territory, but Spain wants it back. The EU is threatening to side with Spain over Gibraltar because the UK is leaving the EU. EU globalist Manfred Weber, who is a member of the European Parliament from Germany, said to the UK, quote, "Sorry, I could send the message again to the British friends. From now on, we will have the interest of the EU 27 in mind and not any more of the British in mind. So we have the interests of Spain in mind and not any more of Britain in mind," unquote. The EU also says that the UK needs to pay it about £50 billion to leave, and that until the UK pays that sum, it can't leave. The EU also says that it wants a contract written up that prevents the UK from stealing business from the EU by turning the UK into a tax haven. The UK's Nigel Farage had enough of the EU globalist demands before it could leave the EU, as reported by RT News.
You've shown yourselves with these demands to be vindictive, to be nasty. All I can say is thank goodness we're leaving. You're behaving like the mafia. You think we're a hostage. We're not. We're free to go. We're free to go. And 85, and this, now I do understand.
Onorevole Farage.
I do understand.
Onorevole Farage. Io sto garantendo a lei la possibilità di parlare e di dire tutto quello che vuole, però quando si parla di mafia, lei dice che un Parlamento si comporta come la mafia, questo per quanto mi riguarda è inaccettabile.
Okay, all right. If you're not, no, I do understand. I do understand, sir, Mr. President, I do understand national sensitivities. I'll change it to gangsters. All right? And that is how we're being treated.
The mainstream media in the U.S. is hardly even reporting on what Nigel Farage said and how the globalist EU is threatening the UK to try and stop them from leaving. Folks, you have to understand that President Trump is just a tiny part of the movement against globalists and central bankers that have enslaved the planet through the mechanism of debt. The building of a border wall, the lower funding for the UN, the UK and Brexit, the Stop Operation Soros protest in Macedonia. It's all about people taking back their countries, controlling their borders, and deciding what is best for their own people. You have been brainwashed by the globalists using mainstream media publications like the Los Angeles Times to think of all these reasons why a border wall along our southern border is bad, and yet you fail to grasp the simple truth that as citizens of the U.S., we have the God-given right to secure our borders and set our own immigration laws rather than giving our sovereignty over to the UN, who sets how many people must be settled inside the U.S., and who's flying in illegal aliens via the cover of darkness and giving them Social Security cards and U.S. passports and putting them on disability status. The globalists control the Democrat Party and bring in millions of people and tell them to vote Democrat. If they get enough illegals in this country voting Democrat, it's over, folks. We're enslaved, and the only way back to freedom from that is to take up arms against the government. As Thomas Jefferson so eloquently said, quote, "What country can preserve its liberties if their rulers are not warned from time to time that their people preserve the spirit of resistance? Let them take arms." The UN doesn't care that U.S. citizens are being murdered and raped by illegals because they don't live here. This is not their country. They don't care that they've put millions of illegal aliens onto Social Security who have never paid into the system, and they sure don't care about your retirement or that our Social Security system is rapidly going broke. They don't care about the security of the U.S. All they care about is their globalist agenda as they create wars and destabilize populations and then ship these people to various countries around the planet. And don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that the UN should care about these things. What I'm saying is that nobody is going to care about these things like you and me and President Trump and the people who live here. That's why we need to be in charge of our own sovereignty and borders. That's the bigger picture here, but there some of you are being manipulated by the mainstream media to care about things like Trump may be secretly working with the Russians, and maybe he's just trying to blame Susan Rice. Or Trump is hiding his tax returns because there's something on there that shows deals with Russia. Or Trump treats women badly. Or is Trump really a Christian? Or Donald Trump's modeling agency is on the verge of collapse. Or how could Trump pick a racist like Steve Bannon? Or who is Trump's ICE raids really rounding up? Or what did Trump tweet? And on and on. And there you are, caught up in all these distractions and nonsense. And that's what the globalists want, so that you don't focus on the real issue, the real battle, which is that the U.S. is taking back our sovereignty from the globalist central bankers. That's why the mainstream media doesn't have Max Kaiser on to educate everybody how both Democrats and Republicans bailed out Wall Street by taking your pension funds. That's why pensions are going broke, folks, right? They printed money, gave it to Wall Street in the second and the central bankers, right? Printing all that money weakens the currency, right? They lower interest rates, right? Which in turn lowers the bond yields from your pension fund. And that's why the mainstream media hardly mentions what Nigel Farage said to the EU globalists because of what they are threatening and demanding from the UK in order to leave. That's why the mainstream media completely ignores tens of thousands of people in the streets in Macedonia in the Stop Operation Soros campaign. Meanwhile, while the mainstream media is distracting you with fake Trump-Russia ties, more Americans are being murdered by illegal aliens from Mexico. This time, it was MS-13 gang members doing the killing.
His body was found mutilated by MS-13 gang members. Now, some of his family is speaking out. They feel it's important that this ghastly details of the story get out to the American people so that people can understand just the severity of the Latin gang issue that we're facing here in this country. Take a listen to Dale Wood, Raymond Wood's uncle.
His hands were cut off. His throat was cut. His tongue was poured into his throat. He was stabbed 16 times. Ran over 3 times. How do you do that to a child? How do you do that to anybody? It's just unbelievable. I mean, it's definitely not human.
Why do you have to go to the internet and InfoWars to hear about this, but yet the mainstream media news doesn't report on this? Because reporting on these types of crimes is against the globalist agenda. Reporting news stories like this makes people afraid and want a border wall. Remember, their narrative is that illegal aliens commit less crimes than American citizens. News like this doesn't play into their narrative, and so they don't report on it, or if they do, it's buried on page 20. Anything that's anti-globalist, they block or hardly even mention because they control the conversation, and hence they control what you think about and your mind. Remember, Trump is just a small piece of a much bigger struggle between globalism and a one-world government and the sovereignty of individual nations and their people. And we start by taking back control of our borders, and that means building a border wall. The EU globalists threatened our president this week, and yet this threat only received scant coverage in the mainstream media. The European Commission President, Jean-Claude Juncker. Okay, all right. It's not Juncker, it's Juncker. But Alex Jones likes to call him Junker as an insult. It's kind of, it's kind of funny because that's the way his name is spelled, Junker. But it's actually, what is it, Junker or something? Junker? All right. Anyways, he's threatened to take revenge on Donald Trump for supporting Brexit by launching an independence campaign in the state of Ohio and Texas. The European Commission president said that President Trump should have stayed out of Britain's referendum. Jean-Claude Juncker said he would promote the independence of U.S. states if Donald Trump continues to encourage EU countries to follow the UK's example and leave the bloc. So let me get this straight. Nigel Farage invites then candidate Trump to the UK to speak on Brexit at a speech he was giving. And the EU says Trump shouldn't have accepted the invite from the UK and he shouldn't have supported Brexit. It is a citizen's right inside the UK to invite someone to speak from another country. So if Juncker had his way, he wouldn't allow a U.S. citizen to go to the UK to speak if it wasn't a pro-globalism event. Juncker had no problem with anti-Brexit people inside the UK inviting Obama to give an anti-Brexit speech. Remember that when Obama went to the UK to tell the people there that they should vote for Brexit? That really worked out well, didn't it? Juncker had no problem with that, but he has a problem with pro-Brexit people inviting Trump. See, folks, Juncker just demonstrated that the EU doesn't respect the rights of countries and it doesn't respect the rights of individuals to express their opinions or even the exercising of free speech. Now, how would Juncker make good on his threat? He would use the mainstream media, which he just admitted that he has some control over, to push for U.S. states to secede from the Union. That could cause a civil war as the federal government moved in to preserve the Union. So Juncker just threatened to cause a civil war inside the U.S. Juncker would use Soros-like NGOs to bus in people and stage fake and violent protests to secede from the Union, bringing up all the old wounds from our Civil War. Folks, that's serious, man. That's serious. That's the head of the EU. Look at what he just said. He just admitted that he's got influence over our media. He just admitted that he has the power to send in NGOs to do these protests. He even thinks that he has the power to cause a civil war in this country. Folks, if someone threatens to do something, take them at their word, right? Take them at their word that they have the power to do it. You get yourself in trouble when you dismiss something as just an idle threat. We need to be vigilant and take globalist threats against us seriously. As Master Sun wrote in The Art of War, "He who exercises no forethought but makes light of his opponents is sure to be captured by them." It's important to properly assess your opponent without prejudice or assumption. In other words, never underestimate your enemy. Corporate elites are really manipulating so-called soft data right now to give the impression that the U.S. economy is strengthening. That's the story mainstream media is throwing out there, that things are slowly getting better. Anything that doesn't fit that narrative, they ignore or run on page 15 buried somewhere in the daily news. The latest gross manipulation of data is the NHB Home Builders Survey. Bloomberg and BMO Private Bank Strategy published this chart that shows that the soft data, that is the NHB survey, compared to the relative return of home builders, or hard data. This chart really proves my point that corporate elites are using soft data to manipulate public perception because it's easier to fake and manipulate soft data or a survey than it is to manipulate hard data. In fact, if the entire industry could get us over to following soft data, i.e., what they tell us to think, what they tell us was in a survey, based on nothing of substance, that would allow them to better manipulate traders' actions and hence the entire stock market. They would love to be able to do that. So they're always pushing this soft data as if it's somehow real, but it's not. It's fake. It's not based on anything. Folks, don't make trading decisions based on soft data hype. A soft data survey should not even be charted, in my opinion, because the act of charting somehow gives the impression that it's real, that it's based on something real, when in fact it's not. I mean, look at this chart. It makes you think, well, there's the soft data survey, and then there's the hard data relative returns, and you compare the two, right? But you can't do that. The soft data survey is completely fake. It's what the NHB members surveyed want you to think, but it's not real. We know surveys are completely faked, and a great example of this was survey after survey that showed Hillary Clinton beating Donald Trump. Surveys are used to manipulate public perception via a psychologically known phenomenon called crowdthink or groupthink. People have a natural inclination to follow the herd, and so if they show you what the herd is thinking, you'll be more inclined to think the same. Don't fall for it, folks. In a rising rates environment with the economy rapidly slowing, house sales are going to plunge as mortgage rates rise. The globalists are trying once again for regime change to get us to go to war in Syria and take out Assad. They tried this in 2013 and even released false reports that Assad's soldiers all put on chemical gas masks right before the attack, which proved their guilt. The CIA likely leaked that false report to the mainstream media who ran with the story. It didn't make sense to any of us that Assad, in a civil war that he was winning, would use chemical weapons and bring the entire world community down on his head. The Syrian government immediately requested an international investigation of the March 19th, 2013 chemical attack. Now, longtime listeners know I came out blazing against the Obama administration. And this was, for me, this was the final straw that finally broke my support for President Obama. I searched the internet for other people who thought the use of chemical weapons was done by some other group than the Syrian government. I found Alex Jones, and I actually beat him on the reporting of the 2013 chemical attack, the false flag. Speaking of Alex Jones, folks, I like Alex Jones, okay? Great guy. I love hearing what he has to say, but I don't agree with everything he says, and that's fine. The reason I listen to Alex Jones is that he thinks like me on a lot of issues, okay? I don't listen to Alex Jones to be told what to think. I hope you guys have a high enough self-esteem that you listen to me because I think a lot like you do on a lot of issues. I don't want anyone to listen to me because they want to be told what to think on issues. All right, so anyways, the Syrian government back in 2013 immediately asked for an investigation into what happened and who was responsible, and they invited the UN in to investigate. The UN and Russia investigations in 2013 proved what many of us suspected. Assad and the Syrian government did not use chemical weapons. Instead, it was the U.S.-backed rebels that gassed their own people to try and get the world community to back their regime change and oust Assad. Oh, you didn't know about the findings of the UN investigation back in 2013? That's not a big shocker that the mainstream media wouldn't tell you this. What is unclear is if the CIA backed this chemical attack strategy and helped plan it. We do know that about a year before the 2013 chemical attack in Syria, Obama issued a secret order for the CIA to support the rebels in Syria. Now, if you've been watching the news, and I'm sure you have, Fox News and other mainstream media outlets are having guest after guest on their shows talk about how the Syrian government gassed its people back in 2013, and now they're doing it a second time. But that's a lie. That is a lie. The UN and Russia investigations both concluded that the Syrian government did not gas its people back in 2013. Go Google it and look it up. So if the mainstream media is not going to report that this investigation in 2013 cleared the Syrian government, if they're not even going to tell you that the Syrian government was cleared of the gassing back in 2013, you have to ask yourself if they are lying again about the Syrian government gassing its people. I mean, think about this, guys. President Trump, and God bless his heart, but he's being manipulated by the globalists. This is an exact repeat of what they tried to pull off in 2013. And again, the obvious question is, why would Assad gas his own people in a civil war he has all but won? Why would Assad be so stupid to do that when he knows that the globalists are pushing regime change in his country? Why would he break international law and use chemical weapons in a war he has all but won and bring the entire international community down on his head? And did you notice that this supposed chemical attack by Assad came just a few days after Trump's new Secretary of State, Tillerson, said, quote, "Syrians will determine the future of Syria," unquote, meaning that the U.S. is not going to get involved in regime change in Syria. Just days after Tillerson says this, here comes the story of the chemical attack. How can that be just a coincidence? It's not. What likely happened is that the anti-Assad Syrian rebel groups are now desperate. And so once again, they did a chemical attack against their own people, just like they did in 2013, to try and reverse Trump's position on Syria so that the U.S. can come to the rescue and do regime change in Syria. These anti-Assad rebel groups are sick, inhuman monsters that are willing to gas their own women and children to oust Assad. If these people ever came to power, that would be far worse than Assad. I have no doubt about that. What I think is happening is that these anti-Assad rebel groups are actually Soros-like NGOs flown and bussed into the area, and so they really are not the people of Syria, but outside groups. So they have no problem with gassing women and children in Syria to achieve their regime change objective. Think about it, folks. Don't let the mainstream media think for you. There is absolutely no motive for President Assad to weaponize chemical weapons against his people. Assad's forces have all but won the war. Syria is the most stable it's been, prior to the chemical attack. Syria is the most stable that it's been in nearly 6 years of civil war. Assad has nothing to fear from a Trump administration and Tillerson, who just said days ago that Syrians will determine the future of Syria, right? Assad must have loved to hear Tillerson say that. He was probably like, whew, don't have to worry about the U.S. then doing that regime change like President Obama was trying, because the Clintons took $250 million from Saudi Arabia after Syria rejected Saudi Arabia's request to put an oil pipeline through. So Syria goes and gives the Clintons and gives Democrats $250 million to do their NGO thing, to destabilize the area, to go for regime change, to put in somebody in power there that's pro Saudi Arabia and will allow them to build a oil pipeline right through the country. Right? Assad and Russia, things were getting more stable in Syria than ever. The violence was going down. They all but won. Now we have a new administration and Tillerson coming out and saying, we're not going to get involved. Syria will determine the future of Syria, right? Assad and Russia must have loved to hear that, right? So using chemical weapons doesn't serve Assad or Russia's interests. So why would they do it? The globalist-controlled media has beaten up Trump so much in the mainstream media and released so many fake polls to manipulate the public into not liking Trump. They know that Trump is eager to look strong to the American people and improve his image with them, and so they think they can manipulate Trump using the exact same playbook that they tried in 2013. Folks, and they did. Trump has made his first mistake as president by being manipulated by the globalists to take out the Syrian government, right? I'm no longer on the Trump train, right? I just jumped off the Trump train, guys. Don't get me wrong. I still like Trump, okay? But this is his first mistake, and I'm off that Trump train, guys. You know, I feel like saying to Syria and Russia, sorry, guys, Trump is just not the smartest guy in the world. He's a good business guy, but when it comes to these foreign things, he just messed up.
My fellow Americans, on Tuesday, Syrian dictator Bashar al-Assad launched a horrible chemical weapons attack on innocent civilians. Using a deadly nerve agent, Assad choked out the lives of helpless men, women, and children. It was a slow and brutal death for so many. Even beautiful babies were cruelly murdered in this very barbaric attack. No child of God should ever suffer such horror. Tonight I ordered a targeted military strike on the airfield in Syria from where the chemical attack was launched. It is in this vital national security interest of the United States to prevent and deter the spread and use of deadly chemical weapons. There can be no dispute that Syria used banned chemical weapons, violated its obligations under the Chemical Weapons Convention, and ignored the urging of the UN Security Council. Years of previous attempts at changing Assad's behavior have all failed, and failed very dramatically. As a result, the refugee crisis continues to deepen, and the region continues to destabilize, threatening the United States and its allies. Tonight I call on all civilized nations to join us in seeking to end the slaughter and bloodshed in Syria, and also to end terrorism of all kinds and all types. We ask for God's wisdom as we face the challenge of our very troubled world. We pray for the lives of the wounded and for the souls of those who have passed. And we hope that as long as America stands for justice, then peace and harmony will, in the end, prevail. Good night, and God bless America and the entire world. Thank you.
Mr. President, what's the legal justification for the strikes?
So Trump's proof that Syria did this was because the attacks were launched from an airfield under Syrian control? What sort of proof is that? Watch the psych ops that are used against the public in the early days of any military action. Remember back in 2013 how the CIA fed information to senior military commanders who then fed it to the mainstream media that the Syrian government put on gas masks just minutes before the first gas attack. Remember that? That psych op operation to manipulate the public turned out false, right? The UN investigation also found many Syrian soldiers were killed in that gas attack, which was never reported on either. This time around, the globalists learned how they failed to manipulate the public into supporting an attack against Syria back in 2013, and so they modified the psych ops a little. This time around, they said that Russians helped load the chemical weapons onto planes that were flown out of an airport in Syria. These are the kinds of things that the CIA leaks to the mainstream media in the early days of military action in order to get the public on board, but they later turn out to be false. What happens inside your brain is that you hear information like that and you think, oh, that's proof. After a few days, you forget what that proof was because the mainstream media is no longer reporting that lie in fear more and more people will research and question it. After a week or so, you find yourself supporting the military action, but you don't really know why. You can't remember why. You just know that there's irrefutable proof somewhere that Syria and the Russians did it, but you can't logically justify why you feel that way, aka you just got rickrolled. Another early psych ops lie put out there by Trump is that Russia failed to hold up its end of the bargain in terms of making sure Syria destroyed its chemical weapons cache. Folks, and Google this, right? Research this yourself. The UN Security Council Resolution 2118 of September 27th, 2013 required Syria to assume responsibility for and follow a timeline for the destruction of its chemical weapons and its chemical weapon production facilities. On June 23, 2014, the last chemical weapons were shipped out of Syria for destruction. The actual destruction operations were performed by a team of U.S. Army civilians and contractors who destroyed an estimated 600 metric tons of chemical agents over a period of 42 days. Oh, you didn't know that the UN, Russia, and the U.S. took care of destroying all of the Syrian government's chemical weapons back in 2014? You didn't know that? But I thought you knew enough to form an opinion that Trump was correct in attacking the Syrian government for the use of chemical weapons.
Well, the Kremlin is calling the U.S. strikes an act of aggression against a sovereign country carried out using an invented pretext. Moscow also says the strikes simply violate international law. Now, that's according to President Putin's official spokesperson. With more on that, Roman Kostrov joins us live from central Moscow. Very direct language being used there, Roman. What else do we know?
Absolutely. Well, we did get the reaction from the Kremlin this morning, as well as various other branches of the Russian government. You already mentioned that Dmitry Peskov quoted Vladimir Putin by saying that he considers the U.S. missile strikes an act of aggression against a sovereign nation under a made-up pretext, and it is a violation of international law. He also added that the Syrian army does not have any chemical weapons at the moment, and this fact was documented by the United Nations chemical weapons watchdog. He also added that Vladimir Putin considers the fact that the use of chemical weapons by terrorists is ignored is further deteriorating the situation in Syria. Also, Vladimir Putin said, according to Dmitry Peskov, that the purpose of this strike by the United States was to distract international attention from scores of civilian victims in Iraq. Now, Russia's foreign ministry just a short while ago also issued their statement, and just to recap, they said that United States once again demonstrated a thoughtless approach. They bombed a country that's fighting against international terrorism. United States actions are illegal, and Russia will now halt the deal with the U.S. military, preventing incidents and ensuring flight security in the operation in Syria. Well, we already got a response to that from U.S. Strategic Command, who said that Russia discussion on sharing space awareness data relatively quickly, ready to facilitate conversation with Russia on this matter. So that's the latest what's going on with that. Meanwhile, U.S. State Secretary Rex Tillerson said that there was no contact with the Russian president on the strikes beforehand. However, he said all military agreements between Russia and U.S. have been observed. Meanwhile, Russian embassy in Syria still have no information on whether any Russian citizens became victims of this U.S. missile attack in Syria. Now, the Russian parliament is already also reacting to what happened this morning, and they're calling calling for an emergency meeting of the UN Security Council, saying that an aggression was made against a UN member country.
Roman Costro bringing us up to date on the Russian reaction there from central Moscow. Thank you.
What Trump did was stupid, and it risks escalating this multi-sided conflict in Syria to a whole new level. It was stupid because Trump took action without even asking for an independent investigation and verification that Syria and Russia really did launch a chemical attack against people. It was so stupid when you consider that back in 2013, the Syria government was exonerated by a UN investigation that found that the rebel fighters in Syria, the NGOs, were responsible for the attack against civilians in a desperate bid to draw the U.S. into the conflict.
Leader, now the Foreign Affairs spokesperson for the Scottish National Party, he said that airstrikes are no substitute for a policy towards ending the conflict. Such strikes, he says, should take place after detailed examinations. And he's also talked about how sudden Donald Trump's U-turn on Syria has been, and had a dig at Westminster's support for him by saying if the position of the UK government is merely to back any US action, whatever it may be, then they're going to find themselves struggling to keep up with the twists and turns of the Trump administration. We've also heard from the opposition Labour leader here, Jeremy Corbyn. His statement is a marked departure from kind of the chorus of approval that we've heard from world leaders and politicians so far. He said that what the US has done risks escalating this very complicated conflict even further. He's called for an urgent, independent UN investigation, and he's warned that unilateral military action without legal authorization or independent verification risks intensifying this multi-sided conflict.
Sure, I suppose Donald Trump being unpredictable is nothing new, but when it turns into military action, that takes it to a whole different level, of course, doesn't it? And I suppose the condemnation that we've heard from the usual quarters that we would expect, but quite intriguing that only one Western country is showing any note of caution there, and that being Austria, which says a lot about other major NATO members who are just quite happy to accept that what the US did, they think was correct, even though no congressional approval and no United Nations approval. All right, Polly, with the international reaction in Westminster, thanks very much for that.
Trump said there was no denying that Syria did this, but he gives flimsy, circumstantial proof at best. Folks, here's what's really going on that our media won't report.
I want to be absolutely clear. I was the top prosecutor for the Pentagon, and as a criminal expert, you always look for motive. And I defy anyone in the media to give me a motive for why Syria should use poison gas against the rebels. Now, why would Assad snatch defeat from the jaws of victory? Both attacks are similar in this respect. They involve civilians, not military people. Why, in the midst of all of these battles, would Assad choose to attack civilians rather than military people? It's simply irrational. Now look at the evidence. Again, as a prosecutor, I want to look at the evidence. We are relying strictly on evidence that is propagated by terrorists. One of them are the white helmets, an arm of Al-Qaeda. Why would we take the word of terrorists who murdered 3,000 Americans on 9/11? Now, we know that in 2013, Turkey helped move sarin gas into Syria, and they were involved in the attack on Damascus. Now, Saudi Arabia gave $250 million to the Clinton Foundation, and they expected something in return. They wanted to run an oil pipeline through Syria into Turkey, and so they launched a war against Syria, which was a neutral, non-belligerent country. They launched it in 2011, and they are determined that they're going to win at all costs. The only way at this point that the terrorists will win is if they can draw the United States into this war on the side of the terrorists.
Richard, I'm sorry to interrupt you because I just want to pick up on what you said there, because we saw it prior to the Iraq conflict that the public the US, the UK, and other places were hoodwinked on the back of claims of serious weapons, of potential atrocities, and there was no evidence to back it up. So surely we have to learn from history, and whatever the truth turns out to be, surely we have to have hard evidence before anybody can take any kind of action towards conflict. Wouldn't that be the case, surely?
There has to be two things. There has to be a motive. If you don't have a motive, a reason for doing this, then you need to be highly suspect. You need to also look at who are the witnesses. The witnesses in this case are all terrorists, and all of them know either they tricked the Trump administration into changing its position, or they are going to lose the war.
The mainstream media is so corrupt in this country that we have to turn, of all places, to Russian news to get a critical analysis of the narrative the mainstream media is putting out there. Folks, what system of justice works this way? Don't tell me this was justice. That you pass judgment and act first, and then maybe investigate more later. Prosecution of crimes does not work like this. First, you investigate and prove the crime, and you have a court case before you execute action against the accused. You don't have a dictator that says, well, I think he did it. Off with his head. I thought we the people rebelled against that type of rule hundreds of years ago. Texas introduced Senate Bill 2097, which seeks to make gold and silver legal tender in the state of Texas. The bill was introduced on March 28, 2017. The bill reads, "The purpose of this act is to recognize this state's constitutional duty, power, and right under Section 10, Article 1, United States Constitution, and the 10th Amendment of the United States Constitution to make gold and silver legal tender in the payment of debt and to secure the right of citizens of this state under the 9th and 10th Amendments of the United States Constitution to tender gold and silver in the payment of debt." Now here's the real kicker. Section 2 reads, "The legislature finds and declares that this act is necessary and proper to preserve, protect, and promote the economic security, safety, health, and welfare of the people of this state, and to secure the existence, solvency, liquidity, and flexibility of the pension fund of the teacher retirement system of Texas." Republican Senator Bob Hall is the only sponsor of this bill, and so I'm not sure what the likelihood is that this will pass. But think about it, folks. Texas sees the writing on the wall. They see sky-high debt, a pension funds collapsing because of the hundreds of billions of dollars given to Wall Street while the Fed lowered interest rates during the last recession, which pushed down bond yields so low that pension funds are now collapsing. So basically, pension funds were rated to bail out Wall Street bankers during the last recession. It took this many years for pensions to collapse because the bonds have multi-year maturities on them. And so when the pension fund goes to reinvest those bonds, they can't get a high enough return to keep the pension solvent. Meanwhile, the Fed has lied to everyone for years about how strong the U.S. economy is, and now they are hiking rates in a weak economy. These rate hikes have already tanked bank loan originations, auto loans, and is starting to tank the housing market. Texas sees all this and wants to protect and preserve the economic security, safety, and health and welfare of the people of Texas. And so there is a push to make gold and silver legal tender. Texas is basically going into competition with the Federal Reserve by making gold and silver legal tender to compete with Federal Reserve notes. Central bank notes are the power center of the globalist central bankers who have enslaved the planet via debt. The Federal Reserve and maybe even globalists inside the government are going to try and stop Texas from doing this. I mean, what the central bankers are going to do, I mean, think about it, folks. What are the central bankers going to do when people start viewing their Federal Reserve notes as worthless pieces of paper and they start cashing in their Federal Reserve notes for gold and silver? Maybe store owners in Texas start to prefer gold and silver coins over Federal Reserve notes, and so they offer special discounts for people paying with gold and silver. Imagine if the entire country crashes while the value of the U.S. dollar plummets, gold and silver rises, and the people of Texas do so much better than the rest of the country as a result. Imagine other states seeing that. They too would want to follow Texas law and pass laws to make gold and silver legal tender. I just don't see how the Federal Reserve is going to let Texas actually do this. Folks, if the economy was so great, why would Texas be trying to make gold and silver legal tender right now? That's really the question here. And it's not just Texas. Louisiana and Utah are also pushing gold and silver legislation. In fact, here's a map of the U.S. with states currently advancing or have recently tried to pass gold and silver as legal tender legislation. Folks, why would states increasingly be seeking to make gold and silver legal tender if everything was all just so hunky and dory in the economy? Think about it. If all these pension funds held gold and silver, it would be impossible for a central bank to take that money and use it to bail out bankers and Wall Street firms. What enabled banks to take people's pension funds was the manipulation of interest rates, the manipulation of the U.S. dollar, and the manipulation of bond yields. Being able to manipulate these three things essentially gives the central banker the power to move money away from any asset class it wants and to deposit it into another asset class. If these pensions were based on physical gold and silver holdings, there's no way the Fed could raid those accounts, so long as states, or better yet, individuals, were responsible for holding the gold, right? Let's don't get crazy here, right? I mean, never let the Fed hold your gold, right? I think after the Fed, the fake Fort Knox gold scheme ran by the Fed, or the gold rehypothecation schemes, or Germany asking for their gold and it not being there, right? I mean, I think that the Fed has forever damaged its credibility in terms of holding gold, right? I mean, no one would ever trust the Fed to hold gold on their behalf. Hey folks, Lance here with GorillaStockTrading.com. Guys, I can't say enough about nootropics, memory, and focus products, okay? I had to try this for myself. Here it is, nootropics. This stuff is unbelievable, folks. I've had people at work tell me, Lance, how did you memorize that? Lance, oh my gosh, now that you said that, I remember that too, but how are you able to do that? Oh my gosh. That's how incredible this product is. I can't tell you how many times over just the last week since taking this product that I've had people say, oh, you've got a great memory, Lance. Folks, I think this is critical for us as stock traders. Any little competitive advantage that we could possibly have over other traders, we need to be looking at charts. We need to be looking at CNBC, Fox Business, all of the streaming sites, and then we have to memorize what we actually hear, okay? I think, too, we need to have a sharp memory so we could pick up when the globalists are using the mainstream media to manipulate us into doing something that is really detrimental to our trading account. Folks, you need to give this stuff a try. This works. Okay, again, it's nootropics, memory, and focus. Now you can, there will be a link to this underneath this video on YouTube. Also, you can go to GorillaStockTradingStore.com. That's GorillaStockTradingStore.com. Then click on Memory Enhancements up at the top. And all of the top memory enhancing products are listed, and scroll down to Nootropics Advanced Nootropic Supplement. Okay, this stuff is incredible, folks. All sales made through the GorillaStockTradingStore.com go to support alternative media sites like this. Thank you for your support. No institutional buying or selling was detected on the ticker. The The LIBOR rate continues to look very strong. That favors the bears. The New York Stock Exchange percent of stocks above the 50-day moving average is at 55.01%. Folks, that's too close to 50% to favor either the bulls or the bears. No signal. The New York Stock Exchange percent of stocks above the 200-day moving average is at 70.2%. That favors the bulls. The Russell 2000 with our True Strength Index. Oh, folks, the True Strength Index is flatlining. The green and the red lines are right on top. No signal. The S&P 500, the True Strength Index, the green line is clearly still underneath the red line. It got close to maybe crossing, but it did not happen, which favors the bears. Transport still operating underneath a red rune spike up. It favors the bears. For the week, money came out of stocks and it went into bonds. That favors the bears. Biotechs are chopping out sideways. No signal. The Ichimoku on the Russell 2000, green cloud, blue and red line still very wide apart. That favors the bulls. The NYAD to the S&P 500, they're both, looking at Monday and then Friday's close. And on the S&P 500, Monday and Friday's close, they're both tracking very closely. No divergence, no signal. The McClellan oscillator, green shaded area, favors the bulls. Pivots on the Russell 2000. The Russell 2000 closed underneath its pivot level. That favors the bears. The S&P 500 high-low index, it's flashing back and forth between red and blue, no signal. The S&P 500% of stocks above the 50-day moving average with our EMA envelope lines. Clearly, it's underneath the EMA envelope lines. The TSI, we have no signal. So we're bearish on the price action, and we're neutral on the TSI. So that's 1 point to the bears. The S&P 500 earnings, very weak, favors the bears. The S&P 500 PE ratio is at 26.52, sky high, while earnings are still very weak. Markets overvalued. That favors the bears. The S&P to high yield debt, they're both chopping out sideways, no signal. Our high beta to low volatility stocks, still, folks, it's still really weak. We had this big move up the previous week, and it was like, okay, where's that going? And now it's just kind of faded and gone sideways. But the TSI did cross, which is bullish. No signal, folks. It's hard to say if this is the low here in March. It looks weak. I'm almost tempted to give a point to the bears just because overall you could see it still slanting downward. But, folks, it's just too close this week. No signal. The S&P 500 to the IPO market, they're tracking pretty closely, folks. No signal. The PPO applied to SPY, chopping out above and under that zero line. No signal. The VIX short-term futures, folks, it's been going sideways in here. It's kind of basing. No signal, folks. The VIX midterm futures look more bearish. Okay, this is a weak downtrend rating, which favors the bulls. Folks, my rating for trading next week is that the bears have the advantage over the bulls going into trading next week. All right, you guys, thanks for listening. Love you, and talk with you soon.